There are several species of fire ants in Florida. The most notorious is the red imported fire ant. Red imported fire ants are known for their painful stings that can burn and result in these pustules that you can see here. It can itch, and it can last for up to 10 days and get infected. Additionally, some people can have allergic reactions to them. Native to South America, fire ants are considered invasive in the United States. They are aggressive, reddish brown, and from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch long. Fire ants can build large nests, usually in the form of visible dirt mounds. Because of the Florida sandy soils, the fire ants don't create like the huge mounds that you might see in other states where they have clay. This species of fire ant is more prevalent in well-manicured landscapes, but can also inhabit other areas like around trees and stumps. They can also be found in buildings. They've been known to get inside electrical equipment and utility housings, which can result in short circuits. When their nests are disturbed, they will quickly run out and attack. Fire ants are omnivores. All right. Mound treatments are expensive and require a lot of time and labor. You can also use too much insecticide, which can lead to environmental problems, and especially in our water. And to be effective, you have to kill the queens. That's right, multiple queens can exist. Otherwise, the colony will survive. Some nests may even go undetected. Because of their aggressive and painful stings, they've been the target of numerous methods of control. So we've been studying these guys for a long time, trying to figure it out. There are unfortunately no control methods that will permanently eliminate fire ants from an area. Using a combination of broadcast baits and individual mound treatments with baits can help in controlling these pests. Spot treatments to prevent foraging ants from entering structures can be done, although they do not solve the underlying cause. Excluding ants from structures by ensuring that doors and windows are sealed tightly and appropriate sealants are used at the point of entry for ants is also very helpful. So this presentation is now going to pick up with Faith Oy, Dr. Faith Oy, who is one of our entomologists and very talented with GHP information. And she's going to start with talking about some of the treatment methods that are out there.
Products split between urban non-crop and agricultural areas. It depends, it depends on where you're working, and you really want to make sure that your label is for the correct location. So you can screenshot that one, and you can screenshot that one. And then I'm going to move on. Okay. So going back to this looking for patterns, right? So generally what happens to us is we misidentify something, we get an invasive species, it comes in, it spreads, and then we go, oh my gosh, we have to learn more about the biology and behavior to come up with better controls. Almost all of our ants, the baits, are based on that fire ant model because we have done so much research, right, as an entomological community on fire ants as an invasive species. So let me start talking to you about Tawny Crazy Ant now. Anybody doing Tawny Crazy Ant work? Yeah? Just yes, no, yep. I see the thumbs up there. So let me show you this related, right? This is the yellow crazy ant. And this one spreads everywhere. Okay, where could these ants establish? Could they come here in Florida? Yeah, they could. We don't want it here. We already have, oh, let me go back here. We already have the cousin, Tawny Crazy Ant. In Australia, where the yellow crazy ant is an issue, they have what we who are old timers in IPM We would call it regulatory IPM. And indeed, when you look at the original documentation about putting an IPM program together, regulatory was a very important part because they were the quarantine part that would help stem the spread of these invasive species. So unfortunately for us in Florida, we don't have that, okay, with this Tawny Crazy Ant. So the Tawny Crazy Ant we have is, it's Nylandaria fulva. We're pretty sure about that name right now. It led us, I have this, I put together this talk called The Invasion of the Crazies. Let's see. We have a sheet for you here. So if you Google Tawny Crazy Ant IPM Edis, we have some pretty comprehensive recommendations based on our research, but I wanted to draw your attention here. This ant, especially if you're in the middle of that invasion phase of the invasion biology curve, spraying alone is not going to help you. Make your customers upset. You'll be frustrated. This is spraying, okay, in a very heavily infested area. And what happens is that the sisters will die, right? There would be a first batch of sisters. They'll come up, they'll die. The ensuing workers will come and walk over the bodies of their sisters and gain entry into houses anyway. So this is a really tough ant to try and get control over. And you know, if you need some guidance, this can be helpful. This document that we have here, this EDIS publication. So how do you know that you're dealing with Tawny Crazy Ants? So if you're an extension, right, Michelle, you know you're dealing with crazy ants when your PMPs tell you that they gave money back to a customer because instead of having to send a technician out every other day to the account, it was just better to do that. And the alternative scenario is if your PMPs explain that their broad interpretation of the label includes doing some things that, well, FDAX would just put their their fingers in their ears for. If you're an extension, you also have long emails from homeowners about the scary things that they try to do and purchase on the internet to control this ant. We have property managers telling us that real estate sales have fallen through because people cannot enjoy their patios. And sadly for us, we also anxiously await winter because all we have been able to do to this point is say our best recommendation is that you can pray for the first cold snap and these ants will be beat back some. Okay, we've gotten a little bit better since then. We have a little bit more research to help you with controls, but generally those have been our recommendations up until now. And we get this, right, from our homeowners. Please spray my lawn. Let me tell you what, here's why this is not going to be particularly successful. So we have to understand this is part, I'm moving into the economy of warfare, right? And these are challenges that are going to be associated with super colonies. Generally, you can kill a lot of ants if you do a spray, but it's not going to be enough to satisfy your customers by spraying only. So we put together a lab study and I highlighted this. This is a laboratory study. If you're getting success in the field, I am glad for you. But we were trying to figure out why we couldn't get longer control with some of our really awesome products, okay? So in the lab, we set up 2 trays and we had a bridge. One side had the treatment and we put their food on the side that had the treatment. We released the ants in a second tray. They had to cross that bridge to get to the food, okay? So that's what our scenario looks like. When you look at our data, Termidor, Temperate, and Suspend actually were our best performing in a laboratory study compared to the controls. And statistically, there's no difference between Termidor, Temperate, and Suspend in terms of the mortality, the number of ants that died. What was very interesting to us, though, is while a lot of ants died, the queens persisted. And that kind of gives us a clue as to one of the reasons why this ant is so difficult to control. So you can use Termidor twice a year. If you're using the lower rate, you might be able to go to 4 times a year. But if you're just spraying, You're going to have to pick something else to go in between those treatments. And it's going to be very labor intensive and probably not very profitable either. So just a pretty picture. Take a break. Look at these lovely ants. This is brood. There's lots of them. That's my point. There's just a lot of these ants. So here's the distribution of Nylandaria fulva. Our USDA APHIS folks had stopped kind of keeping track of where this ant was popping up because it's pretty much through this whole southeastern I-10 corridor coming down here. We had misidentified this ant. There's no doubt about that, okay? So when we started working on this ant, this is how many name changes we went through here. We've settled on Nylandaria fulva, the Tawny Crazy Ant. We did not cause this ant. Just saying, folks, we did not make the love bug and release it. We did not do anything else. We're trying to find a solution, okay? One of the first calls that I got was from a really excellent county agent up in Jacksonville. She sent me this picture and I was thinking, why is she sending me a picture of dirt? And she also sent me a picture of a jar of what I thought were coffee grounds. And they were Tawny Crazy Ants up in the Jacksonville area. They were actually sweeping this many ants out. And this is after the perimeter treatment. So the product that you pick, this is one of the issues with some of the slower acting perimeter products that we have. If the ants are dying on the inside of the structure, even if they are dead, our customers still complain, right? So the product that you pick can be very important. But the second thing was, oh my goodness, we thought we were dealing with Nylandaria pubens, different species. And we've had pubens in the state of Florida since 1953. What is the deal? It turns out that it really wasn't. And one of the ways that you can tell, there's some molecular markers out there right now, but one of the ways that you can tell is if you look at the hairs of the rear end of the male ants, you might be able to tell whether you're dealing with pubens or fulva. And I'm sorry, I don't have those brain cells to do this out in the field, capture male ants once a year to figure out whether I'm dealing with pubens or fulva. If you get lots of these brown crazy ants, it's probably going to be Nylandaria fulva, it's Tawny Crazy Ant. And you're going to have to come up with a very aggressive strategy in order to control. Here's a nice node. These are really gorgeous pictures here, right? So here's our description of this ant. It's a pretty good size ant, about 3 millimeters, 12 segmented antennae, lots of hairs on it. This is the key character for me. When I'm out in the field and I'm looking and there are ants everywhere and they're all about the same size, meaning monomorphic, and they're not stinging me, it's like, okay, this is Tawny Crazy Ant, I'm good, okay? So here's our issue, going back to the control. So our friends over at Texas A&M, they actually measured, right, numbers of ants. And what they came up with was that the Tawny Crazy Ants in the given area that they were working in were probably about 100 times more than other ants, including their fire ants. So remember I said earlier that a lot of our products are based on that fire ant model. If we're using products that are based on fire ant, but we're dealing with an ant that now has a reproductive capacity that's 100 times greater than any of the other ants that we're seeing, we're kind of asking for a challenge, right? We're gonna run into problems. The Tawny Crazy Ant, what it does is it displaces the fire ant. It decreases species richness. So some of you guys have been with me long enough where you've heard me say nature hates a void, right? So I just gave you this whole big talk about fire ants and fire ant control. I've heard from some of you where you're telling me we're praying for the fire ants to come back if you're in the Tawny Crazy Ant area, because when the fire ants start coming back, the Tawny Crazy Ant populations start going down. So there's a whole bunch of ecology that's going on out there. There's studies that I would really love to do at some point. I don't have that many lifetimes to figure it out. One of the things that helps prevent or slow the spread is ant species diversity. And knowing that nature hates a void, right? What's the next most aggressive ant that we have out there for us to the Tawny Crazy Ant? It probably is fire ant. So having to balance all of these ants that are coming into our environment, both of them are invasive species. It's quite the challenge. And I gotta say, this industry has been really amazing at adapting and figuring out what works for their particular, for your particular situation. So when we're in this spread part, this invasion spread, we say, okay, we gotta study the biology a little bit more to come up with some better controls. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how far we've come in terms of studying the biology. So we started noticing that this ant was an issue way back, okay? And in 1969, there was a progressive farmer. He was probably really cutting edge for his day. And he released these ants for biocontrol against snakes. Yeah. So what happened was, in the ensuing years, in this farming area, these ants had blinded calves. They were associated with sap-sucking insects. Does this start to sound familiar to you guys? Where if you're on the L&O side of things too, if you have scales and aphids and whatnot, you see these ants tending these other insects or pest insects because they're trying to get that honeydew, right? That becomes an alternative food source for them. What they also noted, and these are our friends down in Colombia, this is a publication from Colombia, they noticed that the ant population reaches some sort of equilibrium in about 10 years. So we've been at this long enough that in Jacksonville, we've seen this happen a couple of different times, okay? It's not satisfying to our customers when we say, well, here are your alternatives. You can wait for the first cold snap, especially right now when we're just starting to warm up, right? You can wait for the first cold snap, and in about 10 years, the land will straighten itself out. That's not very satisfying for customers or for us. So I want to talk to you about some IPM tactics that we know will be helpful and use a case study approach here. So the first one is going to be, I want to talk to you about the importance of, and this is what our invasion biology friends call us transporting pests around. They call it human mediated transport. So we've been pounding on this ant since this long. Okay, it's time for me to find another job. This is all I can tell you. So this is not coffee grounds. It's not soil. These are Tawny Crazies on the perimeter of a building at the Navy Fueling Depot in Jacksonville. So some of you folks know that my husband is also an entomologist. He's actually the better entomologist, and he has dark hair back then. Okay, so this is how long we've been working at it. We've been sucking up different ants. I put this picture up here. This is the first time that we actually have like field experience with some of these ants in Jacksonville. And I circled this back here because you see these containers. This fence got shorted out because the ants were coming through. And here are the containers. There's a shipping company next door to the fueling depot. They said it wasn't them. They didn't bring it in. Fueling depot is going, we don't know where these ants came from. We do know that people, us, we move things around. It's not out of the realm that something came in on one of these shipments. We just can't prove it. We don't know for sure. But just saying, it's a little, there's a bit of a correlation there between transportation and invasive species. If any of you are in that Tawny Crazy Ant area, you know these palms with these bracts. It's awesome harborage for these ants. They love it. You can pull this stuff down and get brood right out of that. So what do? We sprayed. And in about 2 or 3 days, we had ants again. So why was there such short control? We had to go back and study the behavior some more. So I had a couple of PhD students, and I want to show you some of the work that we did to try and get a handle on some of this ant. So when we talk about pest control, we have our regular customers, and then some of them are just in sensitive areas, right? So I wanted to show you this. Here's a map. Here's our Navy fueling depot where we first got called to. And here's the zoo. And it's about 136 acres. The zoo is a sensitive area. So when I got the initial call, the zoo, I asked them, what are you doing? And they're spraying a pyrethroid on the interior of the zoo, but they were having to do it often to keep the ants down. They were having to spray pyrethroids around water and fish. That's never a good option, okay? We got there, and this is back when we were still trying to figure out what species it was. They had mats all over the boardwalk here, talking about the Caribbean crazy ant. We don't sting, we don't bite, because parents were freaking out. They thought fire ants were covering their kids when they went to visit. It was turning into kind of a PR issue. The ants were all up in this kind of thatched hut. This is what it looked like way back then when we were driving into the zoo. One of the first places that they had an issue was this rhino enclosure. So this guy tells me, hey, you want to go check out the rhino enclosure? I'm packing. It's like, I don't care what you're packing. I'm not going in that rhino enclosure. But we did get a backside of the zoo, get to see the backside of the zoo. My son was really little back then. And they also told us that they had this separate revenue generator here. And it was trained. They would charge a couple of bucks to go around the zoo, right, on these tracks. And we're all hunkered down on these tracks because they had to stop the train because the train was skidding on the bodies of the ants, which is not good. So what we did find, we sampled the zoo for over a year, and we split it up into 12 different areas. And we use Vienna sausage. I'm sorry, you guys. I come from Hawaii. We eat Vienna sausage and Spam all the time. I just can't look at Vienna sausage anymore because of all the Vienna sausage that we had to cut for this project here. But we put them out, the ants would come to it, and we get a measure, right? We have an index of how bad the infestation was, and we tracked it for all 12 spots. And what we found was that the perimeter is where the ants were continually coming in from. We knew they did a pretty good job taking care of the ants on the interior of the zoo, but the perimeter, that reinvasion all the time, it was adjacent to a wooded buffered area, right? Natural preserve area. And what we also found was that this number 12 was this landscape area. So they were bringing plants in, letting it store, and they were building other parts of the zoo out. So the ants would be in these potted plants, and they're taking it to different parts of the zoo and reinfesting parts of the zoo that had been treated. So human behavior becomes an issue. We also knew one more place, the Stingray Bay, where they were bringing pallets of salt in from outside. The ants were all in these pallets. And that became another human-mediated transport mechanism for spreading these ants around. So what to do? And yeah, you guys, I'm not kidding you. These are Tawny Crazy Ants in fluorescent lights up above. So what do? Strategic use of power, we resort to integrated pest management. We know from our Colombian friends that if you remove debris off a site, and again, kind of anecdotal, they just had a couple of places where they actually measured this, but they did get a 23% decrease in permanent, what they call, Tawny Crazy Ant nests at the plantation sites that they were working in. So they practiced sanitation, and it was very helpful. So harborage removal works to a certain extent, and it also eliminates those pesticide-free zones. So one of the best things we can recommend to our homeowners to do is eliminate as much harborage and leaf litter as possible. And don't just pile it up on your property, get it off the property. The next thing to think about is let's borrow from rodent control, okay? So if you borrow the strategy from rodent control, what do? We want to protect a fence line. We want to put something around the building perimeter because we want to prevent rodents from coming inside. We want to take that same thought process and use it for these Tawny Crazy Ants. The only issue that we have is a lot of our fence lines, and especially when you talk about HOAs, and people come here to retire because they like the nature preserve type things. Our ants are coming in from conservation areas. We are not allowed to put pesticides in conservation areas. And in fact, a lot of our product labels prohibit it, right? And I'm sure that somebody from DEP would have something to say about that as well. What we need to do, what we need to notice is that most ant problems do start from the outside. So this here is a building that has $100,000 of electrical equipment inside of it. And the ants were getting in. So we're trying to protect this stuff, right? We're trying to protect the equipment from being shorted out by these ants here. One of the things we can do is inspect our trees, right? If there's honeydew producing insects, you might want to treat with a systemic, like a merit or an alpine. Yeah, you guys be careful about that bee language and flowering plants and all of that. But what we're trying to do is eliminate these honeydew producing insects so that the ants don't come up and try and feed on that honeydew. Look at the base of trees. I know we just came out of winter, but be prepared for fall. So when fall comes and you know you're in a Tawny Crazy Ant area, start kicking around the base of trees here. So here's my partner in crime on this Tawny Crazy Ant project. It's John Page from Bear. And if you see Tawny Crazy Ants at the base of trees, go ahead and whack that with a liquid, a spot treatment. It'll knock that population back and maybe give you a head start in the next year. Okay, so this is a good time to treat when those colonies are trying to contract. Use baits. Baits are great. We use trophallaxis, right? We take advantage of trophallaxis. You can start with a granular and you can put it in something that's protected to make sure that you have the best longevity for this bait. You want to do something like this early in the season. When you get toward June, what we've also noticed is that the populations tend to really spike right around the end of May, beginning of June. You want to put out that dry granular bait a little bit earlier in the season, protect it. Not an endorsement, just sharing with you data. I put Max Force Complete out in the field for a month and I brought it back to the lab and it was still palatable and killing ants, but we had it in a bait station like this. Okay, and yes, those are dead ants there we did a combo treatment at this particular site. Not all granular baits are going to be equal. Some of them don't hold up, in humidity very well. This particular product did. Use liquid baits in the summer. Ants are kind of like us. You're going to be thirsty. You can secure a lot of liquid bait in a rodent station like this. I know these are expensive, but they're really kind of cool to hold about a ½ liter of liquid. And you can get ant reductions by about 50%. So we did a bunch of, there we go. We did a bunch of sampling in a bunch of different areas. And this is just our monthly, we went and put out bait monthly at our sites. And we were able to get that 50% reduction. Now, having said that, if you have 1 million ants, and you have a 50% reduction, you still have 500,000 ants. That's a lot of ants. But what we used was quantum dilute. And so this is the recipe, if you want to screenshot that for quantum dilute. Part of the studies that we did went into the registration package that EPA had approved now. And so this is 1 cup, okay, of granulated sugar in a quart of water. You want to use a sugar water solution here, and a bottle of quantum. You could use Top Choice, okay, because it seems to knock back a lot of ants. But remember, nature hates a void. The most aggressive species is going to come back. If you're in an area where the Tawny Crazy Ant is all around the property that you just treated, you might get Tawny Crazy Ant to come back with a vengeance, because Top Choice is really good against fire ants. So we know our school athletic fields, if you can afford to put out Top Choice, you just treat once and then you end up spot treating for fire ants right on our school athletic fields. But that means it's going to take out your fire ants, which may be helping you in keeping that Tawny Crazy Ant population down. So I just put that out there. It's an option, but you got to think about your individual situation and where you're at. In addition, you might want to consider a perimeter treatment, because if you're especially coming toward June, July, August, it's going to be really hard to start a management program for Tawny Crazy Ant. You're going to end up doing some kind of perimeter, either spot or entire perimeter. My personal feeling is save your fipronil products as the nuclear option later in the season. Okay. Be careful about the pyrethroid label language, because we're not supposed to be treating hardscapes anymore, but you can treat, things that are not hardscapes. And again, an alternative is something like a Alpine WSG, which is a neonic, but again, watch the B box on that. So one more shot at our quantum dilute. So why bait? Have to leave you with this, because this is the most awesome picture of trophallaxis I think I've seen in a really long time. Let the ants do the work for you, okay? Workers don't consume solids. I know we see them hauling off pieces of our picnic lunch, but what they're doing is they're taking those solids and they're putting it on the larvae, the late instar larvae, which have kind of like external stomachs and enzymes to break down those solid pieces of food. And then the workers go back up and suck it up, and then they share it with the rest of the colony. And they're doing a similar thing with our baits. So when you look at how fine rat baits are made, the active ingredient is put up in like a soybean oil, and they're just using that extruded corn grit as a carrier for that soybean oil with the active ingredient in it. Baits are super effective method of getting active ingredient distributed through the colony. I'm just not convinced right now that we have enough active ingredient going through the colony because of the size of the colonies that we're dealing with Tawny Crazy Ant. But it's better to have some control or suppression than none at all with this method. So I'm going to wrap up here. So whose responsibility is it to stop these invasive ants from coming in? We have all these different levels here. The missions are not always coordinated, but this is an argument for the importance of the pest control industry. And this is why I love working with you guys so much, because this industry is always resourceful. And you do want to help your customers, and you come up with stuff that, we would never be able to do a lot of our research without you, because you have a lot of really valuable field observations for us. So again, pest control industry is super important in invasive species surveillance, management, and control. And remember, part of the art of war against ants is to remain vigilant. It's not just about art of war against ants, it's bedbugs too, right? Got to remain vigilant. So it relies on us knowing what is usual versus what is not unusual versus what is unusual, excuse me. Okay. And this goes to our ability to do identification. You don't have to run through the keys. You don't have to count the hairs on the rear end of the male ant. But you guys are really awesome in terms of telling us what you see about the behavior of these pests in the field.